You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Avraham Kivelevitz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. The Projectionist has Semicha. Hi, I am here with Kolakowski, and some of you might notice that sometimes Yitzchak, when he joins us, is on the road, journeying from, of course, where he works in Weimar, Pennsylvania. You might hear sometimes I'll sign off by saying, "Don't hit a cow," because it has happened, right? Driving is definitely something that we take for granted, and yet we know, unfortunately, the amount of accidents that occur. In general, these type of journeys.
About a year ago, it was just about a year ago they hit the cow.
About a year ago with the cow, boy, time does fly. Time does fly. Sometimes pigs fly too, and other pieces of sausage and other stuff do as well. Which reminds me, I'm here at A&H, and as listeners to our platform know, whenever I do a program as the Mashgiach from A&H, I feel that what I should do, of course, is emphasize the greatness of their product. Sausages here, of course, aren't anything connected to pigs. They're all betachos hakashros, betachos adam, and the sausage is only the tip of the meat mountain that we have ready for anybody who wants to try the A&H products. There's sausages, hot dogs, mini hot dogs. There is pastrami, corned beef, roast beef, chunk pastrami, which is a very nice alternative for your cholent, along with, of course, the huge pastrami plates and the roast beef plates, kishka, so many types of salami. I can't even keep hold of it. Something called, that I only discovered when I started working here, it's called servelat, which is a sort of a type of salami, but connoisseurs really understand it as something very much top of the line. So all that type of, ask for it in your stores. Ask your store owners to make orders from A&H because they have clearly the top of the line. I guess the greatest film about truckers, which is called Thieves Highway. It was written by a fellow by the name of A.I. Bezeries, and he actually wrote another a book about, I think they're called They Drive by Night or something like that, also about truckers. So he seems like he had some sort of history with them. Now, clearly, we understand that it's a difficult job, and this film indicates that. But what also it indicates was that the trucking industry, as we know from the Teamsters and others, is an industry where there's a lot of graft, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes types of robberies and other things going on, not only with the mafia, holding up the truck, but the types of markups that occur between where the product is and what the trucker pays for it and what the trucker gets for it and what the person who is selling the truckers wares sells them for is such an extreme difference that you can imagine that this is like fighting over gold. There is so much lying going on in this film. There's so much cruelty that's happening, as a matter of fact, that you're shocked. We all know about the vice and prostitution. When we talk films that deal with prohibition and illegal liquor, drugs, of course, and selling drugs. But here you see that even in what was it's considered sort of like the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes, the essence of what it means to bring things to market, even there in this area of, which is the linchpin of all essential economic activity, which they get stuff from the farms to the market into the consumer, there is so much haggling and genevus and danger involved that it really, this film, and it really calls into question any sort of morality of directed by someone, Jules Dassin, a Jewish fellow, who not only was clearly a member of the Communist Party, and because of the House Un-Americans Committee, actually left America to make films in Europe, And Jules Dassin, of course, is famous for films that he did make in Europe. I think that one of some of his most famous films, of course, were made there, like Riffy and Never on Sunday, etc. But this was a film he made in the U.S., and it is not only a shocking indictment over what is happening, what was happening in the United States, if it was indeed true. Maybe things were overdone, but it is also so masterfully portrayed. I would say that it has it uses its characters and the cinematography in a way that is gripping. You realize when you watch this film that it is extremely realistic and mature, adult, but it reminded me very much of Cassavetes, that characters are saying things that don't necessarily propel the plot. There's conversations that go on. There's exclamations that happen. Same way, all of us, when we speak, not everything we say, I know this as an editor of podcasts, is crucial and essential. There's things that you say, but you mean something else. Most films were afraid to do that. Most films were almost like, taking a screenplay that was sort of similar to an actual theater production. Like every phrase being said by a character is crucial for the plot in terms of giving us some ideas, especially if you're not able to show that action and it happens off stage, you have a character talking about it. In this film, so much happens between the conversations, between the characters. There's so much left unsaid, and it's shot in such a way that indicates that it really does, although it's not like not a documentary, but it really replicates the way human beings are and their fears. And just like all great film noir, there's always just shades of gray. There isn't any person who is incredibly noble and great. Even and I'll talk about who's in the film. It stars Richard Conte. Now, you remember a couple of weeks ago, Yitzchak, we in our program about 2.5 Jews behaving badly. I mentioned John Garfield. We talked about his death in 1951. Richard Conte was actually discovered by John Garfield. Richard Conte was in, I don't know his complete filmography, but he is someone who sort of could play equally a crooked fellow and also a sympathetic hero. He always had that combination. He doesn't have the classic good looks of a Cary Grant or of an Errol Flynn, but on the other hand, he isn't just a character actor's face. He has a certain vulnerability, and in this film, especially, he's sort of the hero, but you realize that he's acting as an immature human being. What is his purpose here, and why? He's not really a trucker. He's someone who was a decorated soldier from World War II, who has worked as a mechanic right after the war. And he comes back with some money to his home in Fresno, in order to meet his fiancée, played by Barbara Lawrence, and his parents. And his parents are played by two Jews, Morris Karnofsky and Tamara Shane, two famous Jewish actors and actresses who were part of the Yiddish theater. Morris Karnofsky, of course, is one of the great Jewish Yiddish actors who everyone extolled his almost every performance he was involved in Hollywood. He plays Yanko Garkos. He plays a Greek father and a Greek mother. It's played by Tamara Shane, and he discovers that his father has lost his legs in a terrible trucking accident. And the trucking accident seems to have been a byproduct of bringing tomatoes on consignment from the Fresno area, from the rich California fruit area, to the marketplace of San Francisco's famous farmers market. And it was there that clearly an Italian fruit wholesaler was guilty of taking his product and not paying him and getting him drunk and putting him somehow in a truck that eventually had an accident or maybe wanted to have an accident, causing this terrible tragedy to occur. The actor who plays this Italian Mike Figlia, another Jewish guy, could also play, a terrible crook, but also can sometimes play the tough hero and someone who really cared about things. But also sort of like Richard Conte, it was hard to really put him into one format. When Richard Conte's character, discovers that his father has been maimed like that, and it was due to the negligence or maybe the malicious acts of this Mike Figlia, he decides that he is going to have his revenge. Now, how's he going to have his revenge? Well, it turns out that he discovers that the truck that his father had is being used by another trucker, sort of hard as nails, grumpy old guy by the name of his name is Ed Kenny. Ed Kenny, played by Millward Mitchell, who we highlighted a little bit as the colonel in Foreign Affair. That was Billy Wilder's film. That was also made just a couple of years. A trucker who's willing to take advantage of the farmer, the Polish farmer who's got the apples, these golden delicious apples that he found out about, that is one of the greatest farms, that's planted in such a perfect place that the sun gets on them and it's sweet and it can get to market earlier. Millward Mitchell's character, Ed, wants to buy these apples for 75 cents a box, where he could sell them for at least $3 or $4 or $5 a box, perhaps, in San Francisco. And you see the film, makes use of the fact of the gigantic markup. When Nick discovers that his father's truck is being used for this, he takes the money that he was going to spend on getting married in order to buy as many of these apples as possible, in order to bring them to San Francisco from Fresno, to confront Figlia and somehow get from him all the money that he should have gotten for those tomatoes, and in some way indicate that he was going to get justice for his father. Now, again, what sort of justice is he going to get? He's not going to the police. He's going to somehow get as much money as he can from him. And this really shows you how people, Yitzchak, in this capitalistic way of looking at things, don't really know what they want. They know that they're angry. They know that they're upset. He wanted to get married. He wanted to be besimcha with his family. It turns out now his father's lost his legs. He's got to do something. So on the spur of a moment, he decides that he is going to take some of the money to buy the apples. With the rest of the money, he's going to actually get a truck that's from the U.S. Army surplus. And you can see this truck has a white star like the trucks that were used in World War II. And it's that truck, though he's never been a truck driver before, that he is going to drive like his father had done and bring these apples along with his friend Ed to market. And somehow, when he meets this ruthless fruit salesman who has no morals, this Mike Figlia, he's somehow going to get everything he can from him and maybe even physically assault him. That's sort of his plan. Very vague. It turns out, by the way, that there's sort of these two characters that are sort of played for comic relief. One of them is actually a famous actor, even in silent films. I was very surprised to see him there. It's Jack Oakey, who I think we've talked about when we talked about The Great Dictator, where he plays Mussolini. Jack Oakey plays a character called Slav. And his friend is Joseph Pevney. I don't know if he's been in that many films, but he seems to have been a pretty well-known character actor as well. These two guys are following Nick and Ed. They would like to get in on the deal, and in fact, they find out where the Polish farmer is, and they decide to buy the apples as well, and they end up following Ed. Now, what's interesting is that once you get on the road with them, the film really gives you a sense of what it's like with this great location shooting of what it's like to be a truck driver, how difficult it is, how unsafe the roads were, how hard it is to keep all your cargo. Nick gets a flat tire, and when he tries to change it, he finds that the jack slips, and he's almost buried completely under the weight of his truck. And it's only because Ed arrives that he's able to extract him from under the truck. But almost for the rest of the film, which pretty much takes place over a period of about 30 hours or so, or 36 hours, or maybe less, he has a wound on his neck from the difficulty of changing a truck tire, which sounds like he's never done, although he worked for a mechanic. And you see from there that there's a certain amount of honor even among this area, that Ed is going to help him. He's sort of a partner with them, although he could have really just let him die there. Ed's truck doesn't make it because it's the old truck of his father, but Nick gets there first. Ed is being followed by the two jokers in the other truck. The film keeps on switching back between the two truckers. And as he's driving, although I'm not sure exactly the mileage between Fresno and San Francisco, you can see Nick falling asleep. He's been injured by the truck that fell on his neck, and the hundreds of miles that it takes to get to San Francisco becomes almost an interminable amount of time and distance to be able to. And Dassin shows you this by shots of the dashboard, of shots of the trucks that are coming. And Yitzchak, you drive on 2-lane highways all the time, and when you drive on 2-lane highways at night, you can imagine with the big flashing lights of the truck coming. It's a very pressure-filled, difficult to drive, and Dassin does a great job of indicating that in the way he shoots those scenes of how Nick is really almost completely plotzing while he's driving and falling asleep while he's driving. The danger is clearly there. Somehow he is able to make it to the farmer's market, and it's there you see that Lee J. Cobb's character Figlia is indeed one of the worst slimy type of wheeler dealers you can find. He has his henchmen actually puncture the tires in his truck when he realizes what it is that he's holding. And not only that, he hires a streetwalker. And unlike other films where the streetwalkers were club singers, there's no question about it. This is about the Valentino Cortez, who we have concentration camp survivor in the film The House on Telegraph Hill that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Here she plays Rika, an Italian, like her own nationality, an Italian whore who is there to pick up Nick and to somehow get him away from his truck. And that way, Figlia is going to be able to sell everything off the truck to all the secondary mom and pop store owners who are played by various character actors that are quite well known to people. And they're going to pay $6 or $7 Hope Emerson is one of them. $6 or $7 for the box of apples. Remember, they started off as 75 cents, and now the guy who's selling them in the market is selling them for 10 times that amount. And who knows what the consumer is going to have to pay for that. For some reason, although she plays it very well, this role of a streetwalker, she sees something about Nick. She realizes how hurt he is, She doesn't really want him to be shafted completely by Figlia. I mean, suffice to say that he finds himself drawn to her because she, for some reason, although she's clearly a very street savvy person, she shows an interest in him, and she's there really to teach him about the world. He really doesn't know. He's been a soldier, but he really doesn't know the real world at all. And is there any chance of him getting any sort of compensation the way he hopes he's going to get it? Without giving out too many spoilers, I will tell you that Ed doesn't make it. And it's an incredible scene of what occurs. And even though most of the characters don't seem to have much of a conscience, in the face of death, in the face of terror, you see some positivity come out. And actually, Jack Oakey's character becomes not just although he's a Slav, he actually is able to come out and reveal some sort of a strength that is quite surprising. And suffice to say that Nick ends up discovering quite a bit. He discovers not only the underbelly of the world that his father has been on the periphery of, he also discovers that even Figlia, is somewhat of a coward underneath, and that a lot of the bravado of these tough guys is really paper thin. He also discovers that although he calls his fiancée to come, because originally he's able to demand from Figlia that Figlia give him whatever, the $6 a box, which gives him $4,000, that he's now able to get married. When she shows up, by that time, the $4,000 has been taken away from him because Figlia sends his goons to beat him up and take the money away from him. And his fiancée isn't so interested anymore. And he finds himself drawn to Rika, who, despite the fact that she's obviously had many men, ends up really becoming the love interest. And again, this is a very interesting turn because she's not going to, because somehow she sees in Nick maybe something that she can take care of. So the film is in a way, as I said, a condemnation of American life in terms of how the economy is run, how it's so vicious and brutal. We know the communist world was much worse. And these excesses are really part of what it takes to be a human being. But I think this film is an unusual subject matter, and the characters that are portrayed in a way that really make you understand not only the risks that truckers take, but also really how precipitous and difficult almost every journey to enlightenment is. We're all thrust, Yitzchak, as young adults into what we think are our life paths. And the world teaches us things all the time about human nature, about our own character. And that's why I think this really, Thieves Highway is really is emblematic of what film noir can really do in ways that other, very bright Hollywood productions aren't able to do. Let's talk about a journey from this world into a different world that's really in front of us. And this is what we promised to talk about last week, The Incredible Shrinking Man. So why don't you give us the background of this film and what makes it such a powerful sci-fi classic?
Yeah, I mean, Universal Studios, they were famous, of course, for years for their horror movies, the classic horror movies. And then in the 1950s, they went away from that type of classic Gothic type of horror into the science fiction realm. and they produced most of their movies were high, better quality than other studios that were making science fiction monster movies at the time, like American International and others, because they had slightly bigger budgets, sometimes more than slightly bigger budgets. They had very high budgets for the time, and they wound up making these movies that really, especially Jack Arnold, who was the director of this film, he made quite a lot of these movies for Universal, and this might be the best one of the Universal sci-fi movies of the 50s. I mean, Jack Arnold made The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and he made It Came from Outer Space, and a few others. Their movie, Grant Williams, was actually discovered by Rosalind Russell, and went a little bit in theater. Never made it to Broadway, although he often would kind of claim that he was on Broadway, though he never was. But he was in a Western with Rory Calhoun the year before this, also directed by Jack Arnold for Universal. And then he made this movie, The Incredible Shrinking Man, and he didn't make a career out of, he didn't become typecast as the sci-fi actor, because really he's portraying a very normal type of person. He's not portraying a mad scientist or any type of scientist like most of these other movies. You'd have like Richard Carlson or John Agar, one of these guys who were in a lot of these movies, playing kind of the same character, and they were always kind of this, not a mad scientist, but a scientist, who's going into the mole people or the Creature from Black Lagoon or It Came from Outer Space, whatever. As this here, you had just a regular guy. The movie opens out that he's out on a boat with his wife on a little vacation, relaxing. He asks his wife to go down to the galley of the boat to get him a beer, which I thought was interesting because it's one of the few references that I ever heard of beer in any of these type of movies from this time. And and while she's downstairs, he sees this cloud that's sparkling, shimmering cloud passing through, and he passes right over him, and he gets covered with this dust, which apparently was some kind of radioactive dust that causes what doesn't seem like it's a mutation as much as it's a molecular change, that he starts to shrink. And so he starts off a few months later, he goes to the doctor. It's William Shallert, who does appear in a lot of these movies, as the doctor who's checking him out, and he notices that his clothes are too big on him, and he's actually started to shrink, and they have no explanation for it other than that this cloud caused it.
Lower than he was, right?
Yeah, they make these, the way they did the special effects is they made these large sets, and they had to progressively be making these larger and larger sets for him to appear small compared to his wife. It's just him and his wife at home. They don't have any children, but they do have a cat, and that does play very strongly in the movie. But he's shrunk to the size of a child, and eventually the media gets a hold of it, and they realize, he stopped working. They need money. Maybe if they sell this story to the media, but he's so embarrassed about it, it becomes a really strong psychological journey that he goes through, almost type of things like, here it's more of a journey, but than in other movies. But when we examine the plight of people who are different, whether it's the Elephant Man or other movies like that. But here it's whereas someone like the Elephant Man,
I think one of the beautiful parts of the film is, as he's now midget size, he meets a couple of a sexual frustration. It starts off with him sunning himself with his wife, on this boat, and part of the the fear that he has, is that he's not only going to shrink, but his wife sees him as a child, as a toy. He's lost her completely. And now when he's midget size, right, he finds himself attracted to the midget woman, the little person, right?
Right. And so they go out to have soda together at the at the drugstore like it was in the 50s, and then he realizes that he is shrinking again. That for a while he thought he was done shrinking, and now here he is shrinking again, and he runs back home. And then the next scene again, it goes very quickly that he's living in a dollhouse.
Right, he's living in a dollhouse, and again, his wife has to tend to him, like, and sort of like pick him up, and you realize how inane it is, and how incredibly tragic and strange.
I mean, he narrates the story. It's based on a novel that came out the year before by Richard Matheson, who of course made a lot of popular.
Richard Matheson, of course, was one of Rod Serling's favorite authors, to penning so many of the Twilight Zone episodes. Most of them a lot more saccharine and sentimental than this. I mean, Richard Matheson was
well. He also did the I Am Legend, which became the Omega Man, which was a much more of a gritty type of a story. Although I don't know how much it really followed the original story. You said you read the book. I never.
Yes,
read
I did read the book. I did find it, and it was quite a. Although I know when we were off pod, we spoke about the way this film was promoted. The book's cover that I had was quite a lurid one, to tell you the truth, about the incredible shrinking man. But you mentioned and the fact that the trailer of this film. You said how the trailer was a very unique one.
Yeah, because
the incredible shrinking man.
So Yitzchak, that's the official trailer on IMDb.
That's not the one that I saw. So I guess there was more of a traditional trailer made than, and this is more of what I would have expected the trailer. I remember seeing a trailer with Orson Welles narrating it, even though Orson Welles has nothing to do with the movie. They had him narrate the trailer.
It's Orson Welles speaking. I just saw the impossible happen before my astounded eyes. I saw a man grow smaller and smaller day by day. I saw the loneliest and most frightened creature on earth living a nightmare in a world of giants. The incredible shrinking man.
The incredible shrinking man.
Yeah, it ends with the words "coming soon" to astound you. I wonder if that was sort of like the pre-trailer before.
Before teaser now, yeah.
I guess before they had the film finished, and they wanted to build up some excitement about it. Because in a way, 1957, maybe they thought that these films had run their course already. And maybe that's the reason why Universal wanted to sort of like up the ante with Orson Welles, of course, announcing who he is, right? Saying how he saw this most incredible film. I don't know how Orson Welles sees it, nobody else does. Maybe he did it as a favor to Jack Arnold and Universal. I'm sure it wasn't a favor. Orson, whatever he was, he didn't give anything away for free. About him because she thinks the cat ate him. Then he sort of becomes sort of this primitive fighter, right? He can't find any clothes, that he somehow stitches some clothes on himself that fits him, and then fighting with little pins and needles, sticks. He realizes that he's sort of entered into a whole different type of world.
I mean, just before that, what I was about to mention was that he's narrating it himself, and he describes how he became such a monster, and how bad he felt for his wife, of how he's treating her, as this little doll before he gets lost, and then he falls down into the cellar, and he's lost, and he has to just fight for survival, particularly against a spider, which they use a tarantula as the spider, which Jack Arnold 2 years before had a movie Tarantula. I don't know if there are any tarantulas in basements like that, but it becomes very powerful when the big drops of water falling down is huge, and the special effects I think were very, very good. But then in the end, after he beats this spider, he's able to crawl up and go outside through just the screen. He gets so small he can fit through a screen window, and then he keeps shrinking down until he gets to a molecular size or subatomic size, and he gives this whole soliloquy that I like to quote in drushes a lot, especially if I'm not talking to a very Haredish crowd. It's one of my favorite
self-discovery, right? Of how he knows his life is over, but it isn't really over, right? And again, I think this is why I think it's a very nice companion piece to Thieves Highway.
I always I compare it to the pasuk we say in Hallel, Mika Hashem Elokeinu Magbil Shavis, that like the godless of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was that he looks down Shemayim V'Aretz, he looks down on us little people, and that it's that he's not aloof from us, but he's so intimately involved in Hashgacha Pratis, even to, and certainly in the Hasidic Sfarim, it seems like it's down to a subatomic level, and that's something I'll preach about a lot, and then I'll often look at this soliloquy from the end of The Incredible Shrinking Man. Do you want to play?
To become what? The infinitesimal? What was I? Still a human being? Or was I the man of the future? If there were other bursts of radiation, other clouds drifting across seas and continents, would other beings follow me into this vast new world? So close, the infinitesimal and the infinite. But suddenly I knew they were really the two ends of the same concept. The unbelievably small and the unbelievably vast eventually meet, like the closing of a gigantic circle. I looked up, as if somehow I would grasp the heavens, the universe, worlds beyond number, God's silver tapestry spread across the night. And in that moment, I knew the answer to the riddle of the infinite. I had thought in terms of man's own limited dimension. I had presumed upon nature that existence begins and ends is man's conception, not nature's. And I felt my body dwindling, melting, becoming nothing. My fears melted away, and in their place came acceptance. All this vast majesty of creation, it had to mean something. And then I meant something too. Yes, smaller than the smallest. I meant something too. To God, there is no zero. I still exist.
in science fiction horror films. Not only the prose that Grant Williams utters was obviously probably from the Richard Matheson novel, probably word for word in his screenplay. But even this idea that the idea of a beginning and an end is something that man needs to function, but really from God's perspective, there is no beginning, there is no end. Shrinking into nothingness is really the same thing as being part of the greatness, as what we call the Ein Sof, really.
Yeah.
So, do you think that the music there is very, and even his visage is very much similar to what you see in a lot of Christian films? The ringing of the bells. There's a sense of the Epiphany is. It isn't a Christ-like message, but he almost has the appearance of someone like something in a sand and sandal or biblical epic. No?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's an interesting it's an interesting way to look at it.
I think part of when we talk about these journeys, I think part of it was perhaps an admonition against the perceptions that we have in even political machinations and other things about how we check the world out. Maybe that's part of the reason why I guess the film isn't just like the 50-foot woman, or something like that.
Shrinking. One was Dr. Cyclops, which is considered to be a better movie, and then earlier than that was. What was the one with Lionel Barrymore? I'm trying to remember the Devil Doll. Mm-hmm. There were a few movies with the same title that were not related at all, but from the 1930s, MGM Devil Doll. It was a brilliant movie, but it didn't capture the plight of the people shrinking quite the way that this one does,
But again, if you listen to that last soliloquy when he talks about there's other clouds of radiation,
right?
That this was really, there was a fear of what the atomic bomb had unleashed, whether it was the Cold War or the threat of this type of radioactive night. This film, Matheson's message here, I think, is somewhat of an antidote to that. Whether it could really be readily adopted by the moviegoers, I'm not sure. But
meaning a hopeful message beyond that to say that it's
and
not.
Even, in other words, even if this is a world that has changed, we can't live in that fear, even though the world has changed. Hiroshima, Nagasaki have changed the world. We have to see things from a different perspective. We can't just wail and bemoan our helplessness because the constructs of what we hope to happen don't seem to be developing. A science fiction, but I think that none of these films have anything like a terrible monster, a terrible gangster, someone who is grotesque. They really are the fear of what's around us, fear that permeates, that could help us discover in the mundane areas that I think of that are so deep in our psyche. I think that what occurs instead is really not just like the original railroad film. I think one of the first films, right, the Yitzhak was people being brought into the theater and watching a train coming at them. I think that in a way, that type of perspective of how the normal everyday seen in the dark, seen from your living room chair, seen in a different way, can touch elements of primal fear, worry, and maybe a way to even discover methods of dealing with issues, dealing with things that we can't control. And that way, what we have here is therapy. And there's nothing better than enjoying yourself and being able to arise from that chair, Yitzchak, and say, yeah, you know what, I think I can handle it now. What result can you have from 90 minutes of wasting time? That's it, my friends. Watch your step on the way out. We'll catch you again next week. Be well. Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.